So I'm sure you're aware by now that the original Game Boy has tons of brand new homebrew and indie game releases, but did you know that the GBA also has a bunch of new games too? So in this video we're going to be taking a look at a bunch of physical brand new games that I've got for the GBA, as well as a few really interesting downloadable titles too. I can't wait to show you everything that I've found so far, so let's get straight into it. Okay, so first up we have a game called Waimanu Grinding Blocks Adventure. This one was originally released as a DS homebrew game in 2011, and then it was ported to the GBA a few years later in 2013. It's a really interesting history of this game. The fact that it began as a DS game and they actually squeezed it down onto one screen is just something that you don't really see that often, so I was very surprised to see that. And as for the game itself, it's a really simple but fun action puzzle sort of game where you're pushing different blocks around. They begin as ice blocks that you push around, and you just have to squash the enemies and then you move on to the next stage. There's a variety of different power-ups that you can find along the way to make the game a bit more fun and a bit more enjoyable. It is fairly easy and it is fairly simple. I do like the way that when you finish a set of levels, the graphics and the tile set changes, but the game itself plays exactly the same all the way through. So it's a fun little distraction, but it's not really the sort of game that could hold your attention for that long. I do love the fact though that Pico Interactive picked it up for a full physical release in 2015, which is what I'm holding here, and I have to give a huge shout out to my old channel sponsor, Bifrost Bridge Studios, because they actually sent me this physical copy about 2 or 3 years ago at this point, and I just never found the time to talk about it until now. So Kurt, if you're watching, I hope you and your company are doing really well, and thank you. I know it took me a long time to get round to it, but I do really appreciate you sending this over back then. And I really hope that this was interesting for everyone to watch as well, because it is really difficult to find all of these games these days. And interestingly, with Waimanu, it was actually ported to the Sega Master System a few years later as well. So the developer obviously loves making games and loves porting them and experimenting with various different systems, so that's just really cool to see. Next up is another game that got a physical release by Pico Interactive. This one I bought myself off their website when I found out that it was back in stock. This is called Custodian, and this one is actually a port of an old Amiga game from 1989, which is a really strange choice of an Amiga game to port, because I had a look and it kind of got middling reviews back in the day, kind of like 3 or 4 out of 10, and I can see why. This game is just a confusing mess. I played it for about half an hour on stream, and literally everyone in the chat, and me as well, were trying to figure out what on earth you have to do in this game, and I just could not get to grips with it whatsoever. And they even went away and looked at a few other YouTube videos online, and it seems like no one knows what to do in this game. Apparently the idea is to try and find a base, and then you pick something up and you have to take it to a door at the end, but I searched, I scoured these levels, these huge maps, and I just could not find anything to do. And the enemies all have this really weird attack pattern where they just sort of move up and down at the side of the screen and occasionally fire something, but it never hits you, so I really don't understand what's going on in this game. But the graphics look great, it plays really smoothly, and the soundtrack is just absolutely phenomenal as well, so I can forgive it in some ways. It is a really well polished game and it's cool that it did get a physical release, but in terms of the gameplay, I just have absolutely no clue what's going on in this one. And Custodian, like Waimanu before it, actually came out on a bunch of other systems too. A few really obscure picks as well. It actually got a release on the Atari Jaguar. I never expected to see that. And it also came out on the Sega Mega Drive as well. Now the third game here is a really interesting one, and this one was actually made exclusively for the Game Boy Advance, at first at least. This one is called Powder, and this one I found on Etsy from a company called Mega Cat Studios back in 2018. So again, I've had this one for a long time and I'm only just now getting around to checking it out. It seems like a really well polished and well thought out roguelike experience. The fact that it was made specifically for the Game Boy Advance really helps, because it really takes advantage of the limited controls that are on offer here. There's just so many different menus, but it's really easy to navigate, and it's a really rewarding experience. If you've ever played a rogue game before, you'll know that it's all randomly generated, and it's basically luck. You go around these dungeons and you find various weapons and items, and you can use that to try and progress further and further in the game. And every time you die, of course, all of your progress gets wiped out, and it's all the way back to the start of the dungeon for you, and it's just such a fun game to go back and play over and over again. It came with a really nice physical version as well, with this DS style case here with the cartridge there, and some full colour instructions too. And weirdly, like every other game on this list so far, it also got ported to a different system, this time the DS a few years later. So maybe I should do a video in the future checking out some DS homebrew games. I didn't really know there was a scene out there for the DS, but it actually seems like I'm missing out on some pretty cool games. Now for another game that I'd been trying to track down for a long time, and the developer finally put it back up for sale on his website. This is a game called Anguna, and if you've been in the retro gaming scene for a while, you'll probably have heard of this game. This one originally came out way back in 2008 for the GBA, and again, it also came out on the DS a few years later. I guess because it's so easy to port GBA games to the DS, it's kind of easy to make one game and put it on two different systems. But what is here, Anguna, is such a great action RPG. I really do feel like this could have been a proper release back in the day for the system. The scale of the game was a lot bigger than I was expecting as well. I'd only ever played the first dungeon before, but once you get out of the dungeon, it's like a whole big Zelda overworld where you can explore different caves, you can find shops, a variety of different baddies to kill. Just a really well fleshed out game, and I'm really curious to see how it plays on the DS as well. But not only the DS, just like a lot of other games, it also got ports to various other systems as well. Most recently the NES, in fact, so it's really interesting to see how they demade this 32-bit game onto an 8-bit system, so that's really cool too. And if you do want a copy of this, check out the producer's website called Bite the Chili Productions. There might still be some on there, so fingers crossed. It did also get a release by Pico Interactive as well, but I haven't managed to find that version just yet. So if anyone out there does have the Pico Interactive version of Anguna, please let me know whether you'd be willing to sell that, or please let me know whether you actually see it anywhere on sale, because I would love to get that version too. And while I'm not going to be covering these games in this video, I wanted to bring up two other GBA games by Pico as well, World Reborn and Broken Circle. These were actually two cancelled games that I'll be covering in a future video, and along with this other game here from Retro Room as well, which was another cancelled game that finally got a release. So subscribe if you want to see a video on these games and a few others in a few weeks' time, because I'm planning to do that, because it's just another fascinating topic, reviving some cancelled games and actually giving them a full physical release these days. It's so cool. I'm so glad that there's companies out there doing that. But anyway, back on the topic of GBA Homebrew, next I've actually got a bunch of GBA Homebrew video cartridges. So you might know that back in the day there was things like the Pokemon cartoon that got released on a Game Boy cartridge, or things like the Cartoon Network collections where you could watch things like SpongeBob on the GBA in really low quality. But in recent years, homebrew developers have actually taken to making their own video cartridges for the Game Boy Advance, and I've got 4 here sent over to me by TG Virtual, and these are actually music cartridges, and the actual audio quality from these is actually very impressive. The video and the visuals do take a massive hit. I think they lowered the bitrate as far as it could go so that the audio wasn't crushed as well, but take a listen to some of this. It's actually really impressive to hear it coming from the system. And as well as all of these physical releases, there was a few downloadable titles for the GBA that I just had to share in this video. So the first one is actually a game that came out last year, and it's called Apotris, and it's actually a really impressive port of Tetris with basically every game mode you could possibly wish for, along with customization of literally every graphical aspect of the game, and it plays incredibly well too. I did unfortunately just miss out on a physical release of this by Inside Gadgets, so if it does ever come back on sale, I'm really hoping I can actually find it so I can get a proper physical copy. But from what I've played so far, this is honestly the definitive version of Tetris. You can tell the developers really cared about getting the physics and getting the feel of the game absolutely perfect, and they absolutely knocked it out of the park. It's an incredible release. And another game that I missed out on, this one is called Tremblay Island, and this one was a Kickstarter, and it seems like a really fun game. I downloaded the ROM of it, and it's got some incredible graphics. It kind of plays like a mix of a visual novel with some really nice little animated cutscenes, as well as walking around this island and just exploring, talking to various people, and playing a bunch of mini games too. It's a very relaxing experience, and I'm really gutted that I missed out on the Kickstarter, because I would have loved to have a physical release of this one. And another really impressive game that I found, and this one actually ties into a new game engine that someone's built for the GBA. This one is called Butano Fighter, and it's a really cool vertical scrolling shooter. I just love the graphic style in this one, but it actually plays really well too. And this was actually built as a showcase for the game engine that the game's built on, and you can actually go on GitHub, and all the code is open source. You can actually take it and build your own games. There was a bunch of different examples on there. You can do Mode 7 style graphics, you can do 3D graphics, you can do really nice 2D pixel art like this game here shows. It just seems really cool, so hopefully in the near future we'll see a lot more Game Boy Advance homebrew games coming thanks to this technology, as well as a bunch of other ways of making the games too. So that's it for this video. I just wanted to highlight the fact that the GBA does indeed have a bunch of new games, and it's not just the Game Boy that's getting all of the indie game love these days. Let me know what other games I should check out, and maybe I'll do another video in the future. And if you did enjoy this one and you want to see some more Game Boy Advance stuff, I did a video a few years ago about GBA demakes, so I'll put that up there. Go ahead and watch that one next, and thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all again very soon for the next episode. Goodbye.